I was dying in the hospital and my dad came to see me for the last time. I had a rare heart defect. 1 in 500,000, the doctor said. And it was slowly killing the organ that was keeping me alive. I'd been completely unaware of the defect when I'd collapsed at work a few weeks ago. I died 3 times on the way to the hospital. And when they finally got my heart started properly, I was immediately put on a donor list. Chances weren't good. But they were there. The doctor said that I might last a month. But it'd probably be more like a week, maybe 2. I lay in bed, weak as a kitten and unable to do much, for fear that it would damage my heart further. My dad had been coming to see me every day, reading to me, talking to me, and for that, I was thankful. Dad and I, we hadn't always had the best relationship, you see. When I was a kid, I could swear that he hated me. He was always closed up in his office working on this book, that book, or never really finishing anything. Dad had been a prolific writer in his heyday. 40 books over a 40-year span, and most of them had gone straight to the bestseller list. It was as if he couldn't write a bad book. I'd read some of them. They were inspired. His books were how I got to know Dad in the early years of life. His stories, I guess. The only time I really saw Dad was when my mom coaxed him out of his office to tell me bedtime stories. He never read a book, though. They were always straight from his head. He had hundreds of stories, easily telling me a different one every night, up until I was too old for bedtime stories. Stories were how we bonded, how we became close. But after every story, he would look at me as though he remembered something awful, and he would excuse himself. It wasn't until I was almost out of high school that he really tried to get to know me. He came into my room one day with something I had written, and he asked me if I had really written this. And I was speechless because mostly my dad just never really came to ask me things or have a normal conversation with me. He looked so proud at that moment, so different than he had at the end of each of those stories. And when I told him that I had written it, he did the last thing I expected him to. He took me to his office, and finally, he let me see the things that he'd been working on. His office was meant to be a guest room. Or a guest, but the walls were covered in maps with diagrams, story threads, all manners of notes. His computer hummed happily in the corner. He showed me a filing cabinet of resource books on genealogies, histories of characters he was writing. I was floored. How had he been working on this for so long and not published anything? When I asked him, he looked a little ashamed. He said something about not writing anything since I'd been born. Not that it's your fault, he said hastily, as though he thought that I would jump to that conclusion. I guess I became kind of a coward. Well, that never made sense to me. Up until later. After that day, my dad and I were inseparable. He helped me edit my stuff. He helped inspire me to write more. He helped me to find people who would help my work be seen. And by the time I graduated high school, I had several scholarships to study creative writing and English at several colleges. And I decided to take up the family trade, as Dad always put it. I was in my second year of college when I was hospitalized. I didn't know if I'd ever get to attend a third year at the time. Dad smiled when he saw I was awake, closing the book and looking at me. Glad to see you're awake. How you feeling? I tried to smile back, but it just wasn't in me. Look, I'm about to die at 20 before I get a chance to live. Dad shook his head. Something will come through. Don't worry. You got a lot of life left still ahead of you. He set his book down, his hands shaking a little as he laid it gently on my nightstand. Remember when I used to tell you stories? He asked, looking out the window as he seemed to think about everything and nothing all at once. Yeah, I said with a little smirk. Gotta say, Dad, I thought those were the only times as a kid that you really liked me. He looked back at me. His face was sad. You were always a perceptive kid, had a lot of me in you, I suppose. I guess I was mad at you for a long time. I couldn't get over it. When I saw that you had the gift, though, I couldn't hold back how proud I was of you. Your mother had chided me for years, you know. He's just like you. He's the spitting image of you. Why do you shun him? He loves you. He wants to know his father, but I just couldn't. I furrowed my brow. It was weird to hear him talk like this. Why were you so mad? What did I do? Nothing. It's nothing. Hey, I thought I'd see if you wanted to hear another story. No, for old time's sake. I was a little taken aback by the suddenness of his offer, especially after what he just admitted to me. Sure, I guess, I finally said, lying back as the pain in my chest flared up again. I could use something to take my mind off the pain. He eased back in his chair, settling himself in a stoic way that he had always equated to story time. He always sat like he meant to get something off his chest, and as a kid, it made me laugh in my head. Dad took his stories so seriously, and that always made Mom and I smile. Stories were his life, it seemed. It's the only thing he really had other than us. The money never seemed to matter to him, not really. Stories were his wealth. It's about a man, storyteller, who makes a deal he doesn't quite understand. And so, Dad started what would be his last story, though I didn't know it at the time. Marshall lived in a village of normal people who had normal jobs. Some of them were millers, some were carpenters, some were farmers or smiths. Marshall, however, did not have a normal job. Marshall was a tale teller. He would craft tales to tell the king and the courts to amuse them. The king paid him handsomely for his stories, and he was known far and wide for his outstanding stories. He told them in the courts, but he also told them around the city well, in the theater, or in the marketplace. People loved his stories. But Marshall had a problem. Marshall was getting old. Marshall had never married, never conceived a child, and he feared that his legacy would die with him. That's when Seraph came to him and offered him a deal. And Seraph was not a human like you and I. He was a demon, and he was a demon who made deals. He gave people money, he gave them power, he gave them whatever they truly desired, and in exchange, he took their souls. He offered Marshall wealth. He offered him fame to rival the king's. But what Marshall really wanted was time. I want to be the man who writes 1,000,000 stories, the best tale teller in all of history. They bartered, they dealed, and finally, Marshall had his prize. You will live until your 500,000th tale is all told. When that story is told, and the cover is closed on it, you will come with me, and I will collect my payment, Seraph said. Now, this sounded acceptable to Marshall. 500,000 stories was still a great many tales. He signed his name in the Black Book. Marshall went on to live for hundreds of years. In that time, he also found that he remembered the stories that he wrote with an almost photographic memory. He traveled the world telling tales and wowing crowds, but soon he found his time was growing close. 500,000 stories. sounded like a near infinite number. But as the centuries passed, Seraph would appear to him and let him know how close he was getting to his determined count. One day, he appeared to him telling him that his time was nearly at hand. Your count is high, Tale Teller, and you have nearly reached your peak. You have 100 stories left to you. Use them wisely. At this, Marshall became greedy. He saw those stories as sand in his hourglass, and he hoarded them jealously. He wrote sparingly for the next 100 years, but inspiration must have served, and soon he was left with but a handful of sand left. He stopped writing, stopped answering the call, afraid of the deal that he had made, and the smiling Mr. Seraph. Then he made a misstep in a long and careful life. A misstep that would cost him everything. A misstep that would save everything. Dad jumped a little and reached into his pocket at his phone vibration. He looked at the screen, sighed, and got up to go. He said that he had to take this, that it was very important, but that he would see me later. I gasped as he rose to leave, floored. Dad had never failed to finish his story, never left an audience hanging. Oh, wait, what misstep? What happened? Sorry, he said. I'm out of time, it seems. I'll tell you all about it tomorrow, okay? Try to rest easy, and remember, I love you, kid. And then he left. And I never saw him again. I did, however, hear the end of his story. I was waiting for dinner when a frantic group of techs rushed in to wheel me out for surgery. A heart had come in very suddenly, and they needed me into surgery before my condition got any worse. I asked them to call my parents, asked them to call my dad, and they said they would. Right now, however, they had to get me prepped and ready for the procedure. When I woke up, my mom, my uncle, and just about my whole family were gathered around me. Everyone but Dad. Where's Dad? I asked. Looking around, sure, he must be there, but Mom bit her lip and started to cry a little. My uncle told me later that he hadn't even talked to my mom about it. He had gone to a physician and donated his heart to me before coming to visit. The physician had been hesitant, hadn't wanted to kill a man to save a man, but Dad had talked to him and convinced him that it was for the best. He hadn't even called my mom until he was going in to be put to sleep. He told her that he loved her, that she should take care of me now that he was gone. And then he gave me his heart. I sat in my room afterwards, my eyes leaking steadily. I mean, why would he do this? Why wouldn't he tell me? He had to know that I wouldn't want him to sacrifice himself for me. Why was my life more important than his? Why should I matter more than him? I swung a fist out angrily at the nightstand, and the book half flopped onto the edge. I grabbed it and looked at the cover of it. It's one of Dad's journals. This one was a blue and gold spiral pattern and looked new. I mean, Dad had tons of journals. I'd seen them in his office, but most of them looked old and worn, like they'd traveled halfway across the world, but this one was brand new. I opened it to find his clean, neat handwriting inside. He had addressed the first page to me. Hey kid, if you're reading this, then I guess they went through with it. Don't be too upset about it. I had a good long life, and I'm glad to have known you at long last. It's better that your mother have you instead of losing both of us anyway. It probably doesn't make a lot of sense, especially since I assume I never got to finish my story. I wrote it all down on the next few pages. Feel free to read through it. It's as much your story as it is mine. I love you, kid. Take this old heart and have a great life. Dad. I flipped through the pages until I found the place he had left off. I knew his final message should have made me sad, but I wanted some answers. The story, it seemed, was what I needed. He had said that it was as much your story as mine now, and I wanted to know what that meant. Why had he said that it was better that he died than both of us die? Why would my death have killed him? I found the place and I started where he had left off. A misstep that would save everything. He fell in love. He had met thousands of women in his travels, but this was the first one to really touch something inside of him. The two of them fell in love and began a life together. The day she told him that she was pregnant was the greatest day of Marshall's long life, but as he held his infant son in his arms, Seraph appeared with gleeful news. "Congratulations, Marshall, you hold your final story." Marshall demanded to know what he meant. This was no story, it was a baby. He was a living thing. It wasn't part of their bargain. The demon was lying. He was trying to trick Marshall into something, but Seraph assured him this was not the case. That child is without a doubt your greatest story. His tale will be rich, full of life and wonder, and when you close the cover on him, our deal will be done. Unless, he laughed, you decide to write something else. He laughed then, drinking in Marshall's sneer, as he disappeared as quickly as he had come. Marshall had sealed his own fate, and for that, he could not forgive himself. Forgive himself. Or the child, it seemed. That was the end. I stared at the words, trying to put the pieces together. Was my father Marshall? Is that why he had done the things he did? Had he sacrificed himself because he knew that his life would end if mine did? I stared at the page, my mind racing as I tried to figure out what to do with this knowledge. I still don't know what to do with it. But I will not squander my family's gift. I mean, if I'm to be his final story, then I'll try to live up to his legacy as best as I can. I owe him that much. Hey there once again, kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video, or, listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. This is the same thing I say at the end of every video all the time, so I think it kind of goes without saying that I appreciate you, and I appreciate you guys sticking around. We're moving into some of the hottest months of the year, which means that it's probably a good thing if some of you guys start to cool down a bit. A great way to do that, iced tea, sweet iced tea. I'm from Texas, is what we do. And my wife sells tea. Etsy.com/shop/ivory-monocle-tea to get a whole bunch of different kinds of teas, even creepypasta-based teas. And if you ask for the MCP dabbing sticker, you get a special one that nobody else gets. And as always, I want to give a very huge thank you to all of my supporters out there on Patreon. I say this every time, but I truly mean it. You guys are the real MVPs, and without you, I don't think I would be able to continue doing this at the capacity that I do. Especially not as many brand new custom stories as we've been getting just for the channel. So a very special thank you to Jacob Shaffer, Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Bryon Arce, Ken Lando Higuchi, Bobby Karman, Stephanie Butler, Tristain Pelton, Chase Burnett, Diana Kraus, Nessie, Ronny Hansson, Blitzscreed, BardoHawk764, TheBananaMafia 1, Hollow Hero, Ferb, Harley, Billy Morrow, Katie Birch, Sashi Sazaku, Kayden the Spooky Boy, MyBodySoundsLikeRiceKrispys, Ashwood, Lord of the Weebs, Jay, Thea Lockett, Miss Exandra, Suji Campbell, Stricken, Ozreen Fox, Robert White, Legit Quadfeed, Fried Chicken 12, James Bruce, Freddie Krueger, Ty Nanny, Infernal One, James Lowe, Lisa Cottrell, Caspian, Jordan Ells, Hades' Nephew, Tater Chip, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Cryptic Nightmares, Kiri the Sloth, Tommy Green, Sky Harbor, Caleb Dougal, Nina Smith, Nico Kyle, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Paulson, Trace Miles, and Corey Kenshin. Thank you guys once again so much, and if you would like to join this list of people's names that I mispronounce, or the list of people's names that are down there in the description, check out patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, and as always, a very sweet dreams to all of you. Good night, folks.